In this video, we'll be talking about light and the absorption spectrum. So here we have Johnny Depp, and he's been stranded. Captain Jack Sparrow has been stranded now for many months, and he's getting so bored to the point where he's thinking about the absorption spectrum and light. He is wondering why this palm tree's leaves are green and why this carrot is orange. He's just getting that bored. So we're going to help him answer that question. Okay, so we're going to explain this process really carefully. So what allows us to be able to see? Before we can think about color, we need to think about what allows us to see. When the sun is down and you have no lights on, do you see anything? No, you see darkness. You cannot see objects if it's pitch black, if there's no light at all, right? So we know therefore that the sun or any source of light is the key to be able to see anything in the first place. Now, knowing this, now we can talk about color. So what allows us to see color? Why don't we see everything the same color? Okay, so to understand this, I'm going to use a little diagram here, okay? Don't freak out, it's real simple, okay? I'm going to just pay attention to how I'm saying this. So the sun emits light, right? So this is going to represent the light, okay? And because the sun emits light, we're able to see things, okay? And the reason is because light is emitted from the sun. And when light moves around, okay, ignore this for now. When light is emitted and it moves around, it will bounce off of objects, okay? And when it bounces off of the objects, that light will bounce off of the object, let's say this leaf, it will bounce off of this leaf and it will go towards our eyes, and our eyes will perceive that light, and therefore we can see it. Now, what determines the color? So sunlight is made up of many colors. When we mix all the colors of the rainbow in terms of light, we get white light, okay? Now, how can we prove this? So to prove that sunlight is made up of all the colors of the rainbow, all we have to do is put a prism on your table in your room. And if the sunlight passes through it, you'll notice all of these colors will come out on the other side of the prism, okay? These are all the colors of the rainbow. Now, we notice that the different colors of the rainbow have different wavelengths. So for example, red here has a long wavelength, really long. So light is pretty much just waves, like in the ocean. And then we look at purple and we notice the wavelengths are really short wavelengths or quick, right? So different colors have slightly different wavelengths. And this is important because, for example, when orange wavelength comes into Johnny Depp's eyes, he doesn't see the orange. What he sees, what his eyes perceive, is a wave. So the wave, the specific wavelength of orange will pass into his eyes. His brain will understand that if a wavelength is this big, it means orange. And so his brain will create the color orange. If the wavelength of red passes into his eyes, his brain will think, okay, this wavelength is this big, so it must be red. And so he thinks it is red. Okay, so that's how it works. Depending what wavelength of light enters your eye, that will be perceived as a certain color. Now, one step further. So what really happens is, we know the sunlight is made up of all of these wavelengths and it's mixed. When you mix all of these wavelengths, it looks white. This is different from paint. When we mix all the colors of paint, we get brown. When we mix all the colors of light, we get white. Now, let's look at it in terms of this. Okay, let's ignore this picture for now. And we come back to why he is seeing that leaf as green. Okay. So here we go. So notice the sun is shining normal light, okay? The white light. It's got all the wavelengths in it, right? In all directions. But we're focusing on this ray, okay? And it comes towards this plant. Now the reason why he can see this plant as green is because plants, leaves, are made up of a material that absorbs all the wavelengths except green. So all of those colors that we saw before, all of those waves are absorbed by the material of the leaf, except one, green. The green wavelength is not absorbed. It is bouncing off. So it bounces off of the leaf and it goes in all directions. And so when Johnny Depp is looking at that leaf, those wavelengths continuously bounce off and go into his eye. Only the green wavelengths. And so he sees this plant as green because this plant absorbed all the wavelengths from the sun except green. Green was reflected. The same logic can be used for this carrot. When the sun's rays are shined at the carrot, all wavelengths of light that the sun rays are made of are absorbed except orange. Okay, so orange light will now be reflected and go into his eye. So he will see this object as orange. Now think about black. What is black? So black, when you see a black object, it means that object absorbed. Let's look at his hair. Okay, his hair is black because when sunlight goes towards his hair and hits his hair, all the light is absorbed. Every single wavelength of color is absorbed. So nothing is reflected. And if nothing is reflected, it means when he looks at his hair, there is no wavelengths coming off into his eye, so no color is produced, no color is seen. Okay, that's how it works. So the thing you see in reality, the color you see, is every color that is reflected, not every color it absorbs. Okay, now, what makes different objects absorb different wavelengths? Because we know that this one is green, but this one is orange. Why? What makes them absorb different wavelengths? So this is also an important question. So to consider this, we're going to look at this leaf. Okay, so leaves are made up of plant cells, right? Plant cells have something called a chloroplast. A chloroplast is this little structure here. This is where light is absorbed, okay, in the plant for photosynthesis. And inside the chloroplast, so inside this little structure, there is loads of little molecules called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a pigment. A pigment is anything that absorbs light. So this specific pigment, chlorophyll, only absorbs all the colors except green. So this is the reason, chlorophyll is the reason that leaves appear green, because this thing can only absorb everything except green. It is not capable of absorbing green, and therefore green is reflected. So pigments are the reason that things have a specific color. So let's refer now back to the carrot. The carrot has a different pigment called carotene. Carotene sounds like carrot, right? So carotene is we're going to look at it soon, is a pigment that can absorb all the colors except orange. Okay, so it has a different structure compared to chlorophyll. Okay, so that's why different wavelengths are absorbed in different objects. Okay, so hope that makes sense for now. So now we're going to go look at this next thing, okay, called the absorption spectra. If you understood what I was just talking about, this is real simple. So here we have on the y-axis wavelength. I made it easy and put the color, what that wavelength means. Okay, so 700 wavelength is a long wavelength. Okay, so that corresponds to red. And the shortest wavelength, as we saw before, was purple, right? Now, absorbance. So we're going to look now at this one here. This right here, this line right here is, guess what? This represents chlorophyll. Okay, chlorophyll. Notice what happens here. Chlorophyll absorbs what the best? Blue, red, and what does it absorb the worst? All this, that's green, right? So this makes perfect sense. This is the absorption spectra of chlorophyll. All the green area is not absorbed, meaning all the green is consistently reflected, and that's why he sees it as green. Let's look at another thing. So you don't only have one chlorophyll in your cells, in your plant cells. Plant cells have different variations, but they're basically the same. So here's another variation of chlorophyll. So this is chlorophyll A, which I just showed here. Now chlorophyll B is slightly different, but it's very similar. So notice here, this one also absorbs blue really well, and also orangey red really well, but green still reflects it. So it's very similar, But notice that there is some variation in the chlorophyll. They're not all the exact same. You have different variations in plant cells. Now, done with that, let's go to the carrot. The carrot has this molecule here, okay? I mean, has the carotene, remember? Carotene looks like this. It is here. This pigment absorbs blue really, really well. And guess what it doesn't absorb? All the orangey red stuff. And that's the color that carrots are, right? So if it doesn't absorb any of the orangey, yellowy, red stuff, that's what we see, because that's what reflected. So this is what the absorption spectra is. It just shows you what wavelengths are really well absorbed and which ones are not well absorbed. The ones that are not well absorbed are the ones that are reflected and that you see. Now, referring this to photosynthesis. So this means that the light that is used by plant cells to make energy from photosynthesis cannot be green, because green is reflected. This means red and blue and the other colors will be the best for photosynthesis. So remember how we saw before. Let me go back to it. So remember how we saw that blue light and red light was the best absorbed. Notice here, this is a little curve showing the rate of photosynthesis and wavelength. Notice that the two areas that are the best absorbed in this graph correspond to the two areas that do the best photosynthesis, right? So green light makes the less photosynthesis because it is completely reflected, whereas purpley, blue, and red light are really good for photosynthesis. So if in theory, if you wanted your plant to grow the best, you would give it only red light and maybe some blue light, but no green light, because with green light, it will not do any photosynthesis. So you can do this as an IA experiment and see how different wavelengths can affect plant growth and photosynthesis.